Iran is 10 times more dangerous than North Korea because North Korea essentially wants to survive. Iran wants to spread, is spreading, was very successful until 2.5 years ago by establishing the ring of fire in the Middle East of other radicals. So whatever is bad for the Iranian regime is good for the Middle East and for anybody else in the world that doesn't want barbarians to dominate our future.
Professor Dan Schueftan is one of Israel's most blunt and strategic thinkers. He argues that October 7th did not weaken Israel, it made Israel stronger. He says fear matters more than love, that listening to Europe would be suicide, that the West is disarming itself ideologically, and that Israel's biggest mistake before October 7th was being reactive, not preemptive. Today, we're talking power, deterrence, survival, and the future of Western civilization. Professor Schueftan, welcome.
Good evening.
You've said Israel is in a dramatically better position today than before October 7th. How can a massacre make a country stronger? Please walk us through.
Well, you can ask after the Second World War, how can a surprise in Pearl Harbor make America stronger after the Second World War? Israel is today recognized by far, by everybody, as the most important power in the Middle East. Actually, we are already having problems with Arabs considering us to be too strong for them, and therefore some of them are gathering on the wrong side. But all the radical forces in the Middle East have been considerably weakened, and if it's bad for the bad guys, it must be good for the good guys. And the ultimate good guys, of course, are the Israelis. Now, even most Arab governments recognize it. Again, they are uncomfortable with how strong Israel is, but nevertheless, they recognize that Israel is extremely strong in the Middle East. And one last but extremely important point. If the Americans want to leave the Middle East, and they must leave the Middle East, the carriers shouldn't stay here, they should be in the China Sea. This is where the free world is being challenged more than anywhere else. Then the question is, who do you leave the Middle East with? And then it can be Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and they have these advantages and other advantages. But by far, the strongest power, by far the linchpin, is the Israeli power here in the region. So even from an American point of view, the fact that Israel is reliable, I mean, you can't even rely on the British when it comes to Diego Garcia, let alone on Arabs in the region beyond a certain point. Israel is committed to fighting against the same enemies that the United States is, not because we're trying to do America a favor, but we cannot survive without fighting the radicals. So we are committed to it. We are strong enough to do it. Do we have difficulties? Of course. Do we have solutions to the problems in this region? Of course not. But is the situation much better, dramatically better than before? Yes.
You've argued that what matters is not that people love Israel, but that they fear it. Is fear now central to Israel's long-term strategy?
I don't want anybody to fear us. I want the bad guys to fear us. I don't want our allies to fear Israel. In the Middle East, if somebody is not afraid of you, you must be afraid of him. Okay? In the Middle East, when it comes to radical forces, the only way you may get some kind of an arrangement that they're not happy with, but they leave you alone, is if they're afraid of you. What we call peace in the Middle East is not people who wish to live together with the Jews. It is people who understand that they can't afford to confront the Jews. If we haven't had a war with the Arab world coming together under one Arab leadership, is that the only Arab leadership that could bring together all the Arab forces in the region no longer can do it and recognizes and openly recognizes that it cannot do it. Egypt was the only Arab power who could bring together, who could mobilize all the resources of the Arab world. And they made war against Israel in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And since the end of the 70s, we haven't had a regional war because Arab states recognized the overwhelming power of Israel over any Arab combination. and the unbearable cost that Israel can inflict on anybody who makes war on Israel. Now, once they don't make war, once they're not considering making war against Israel, we don't need them to fear us. We need them only to fear the possibility of confrontation with us, and this requires not only power, but more than anything else, determination. We've had a very powerful America with a leadership that was not determined under Jimmy Carter, under Barack Obama, and the result in terms of the strengthening of the radicals was that they didn't fear America. Once they fear America, the chances of the radicals to bring together all the Arab forces, all the Muslim forces who are not radical, is reduced dramatically.
You've said that some of Israel's enemies are barbarians who must be broken, not negotiated with. Who exactly are you referring to, and why do you believe that force rather than compromise is the only viable response?
Well, if you look at the barbarians in the Gaza Strip, they openly tell you that what they want is to kill you. And that's the only thing they want. And this is what they get up in the morning for. And this is what they educate their children for. And they're saying, I quote, "We will win because we love death. You Jews will lose because you love life. We will kill every Jew." By the way, it will extend also to non-Muslims beyond the Jews if they had succeeded. So the Gaza Strip is one example. The Hezbollah in Lebanon is another example. The Iranian regime is another example. The Houthis are in Yemen are another example. And they say, death to Israel, death to America. The Houthis even add humiliation to the Jews, and God is greater. Okay? So that's what they get up in the morning for. You see, we make the mistake of assuming that because they're human beings, and they are human beings, Hitler was a human being, Pol Pot was a human being, Adolf Eichmann was a human being, we make the mistake of assuming that because they're human beings like us. They come from a parallel value universe that has nothing whatsoever to do with the reality we live in. We want our children to have a better life, a safer life, a more constructive life. For them, a better life is to kill us. And if we don't understand it because we are afraid to discuss culture, because some idiot may shout out, "You're a racist," and then you shut up and you can't discuss it anymore, then you misunderstand profoundly what's going on around you. And this was the reason we were unprepared on October 7th, because we assumed that in the Gaza Strip we have people like us. We also now foolishly assume that we can de-radicalize them, that we can bring them to a point where you can have a Riviera in Gaza. They want to kill us. They want nothing else than killing us, and they're not willing to wait for the Riviera, and they will continue to fight us.
So it seems that we speak two different languages. For example, Yahya Sinwar was treated for a brain tumor, and instead of being grateful for us saving his life, he decided to plan October 7th. So does it seem like he saw that act of kindness as weakness?
Of
Are we
course.
speaking two different languages?
Of course. Again, he comes from a parallel value universe. This has nothing whatsoever to do with our experience as human beings. And cultures can change, don't misunderstand me. But people need to want to change their culture in order to change their culture. We have changed our culture. I mean, Zionism is about changing the very basic tenets of Jewish life. We decided we want a completely different life than Jews had in exile for a very long period of time. So here is a good example of cultures changing. A Muslim country, take Turkey, changed twice. It changed 100 years ago positively with Mustafa Kemal. It changed about 25 years ago negatively with Erdogan. And again, cultures can change. We make the stupid assumption, a very academic stupid assumption, that if cultures can change, they must change. And if they must change, they must change positively. Or that you can make people change their culture if they themselves don't want to change their culture. But if you don't discuss culture, because you're too politically correct. You don't understand human behavior because human behavior is determined primarily by culture.
Now, what is the difference between de-radicalizing Japan after World War II and de-radicalizing Gaza?
In Japan or in Germany, first of all, you had a society before the Second World War that tried at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of this century, to modernize, to make itself adjustable to the modern reality of the 20th century. And there were no other 22 Japanese states all over the world that were willing to support another Japanese state that is not leaving radicalism. You had an overwhelming power, it had the legitimacy to do it. Many Japanese wanted to change, and these Japanese became dominant when the United States didn't give them any excuse. Now we have foolishly people rewarding Palestinians for behaving in a barbaric way. A, by giving them aid of the kind that makes it possible for Hamas to survive in the Gaza Strip. B, by the so-called international community treating every refugee on the globe only for 2 years and only when he resettles, but the Palestinian refugees are being given everything 5 generations after the calamity they brought on themselves. And then the stupid governments of France and Britain and Canada and Australia are offering an independent Palestinian state. I mean, they recognize the existence of a non-existent state, even when the Palestinians in the West Bank as well as in Gaza are openly cheating them by writing a constitution that makes it possible for the PLO to continue to strive for the destruction of the state of Israel, even when you have an independent Palestinian state. So it pays to be counterproductive because you have so many people who are stupid enough to reward radical behavior, including barbaric behavior, as we've seen in the Gaza Strip.
Now, what role does the United Nations play in all of this?
Negative. I mean, I haven't seen anything from the United Nations that is not negative. They consider the fact that an organization where you have one country, one vote, the majority of the participants don't come from a society where you have one person, one vote. So you have an overwhelming majority of countries who are autocratic or despotic or barbarians, and they sit in judgment over what is democracy and what is human rights. It is more ridiculous than anything else. And the only thing you get from the United Nations is damage. Look at the contribution of the United Nations to settling the issue in the Ukraine. Absolute zero. I mean, nobody even expects the United Nations to be effective. Look at its contribution to what is happening in the Middle East. Exclusively negative. We've never seen any positive contribution. Even the positive contribution before we had most barbaric states members of the United Nations, namely 1947, this is not what established the State of Israel. Israel had to fight in order to impose a Jewish state on the Arab enemies of Israel. And the decisions of the United Nations could be nice to have, but this is not what established the State of Israel. And of course, if you look throughout the conflict between Israel and the Arab states, you see zero positive impact. What is the impact of the United Nations in Iran against this barbaric regime? What is the impact of the United Nations in the civil war in Syria, in the civil war in Sudan? Absolutely zero. The only impact is negative because the barbarians use the United Nations in order to justify their barbaric behavior.
Is it a mistake that the West assumes that democracy is the only way to run a society, to impose a democracy on Arab countries which don't have democracies generally? Is that a mistake that the West is making, or not?
Democracy cannot be imposed because we spoke before about the inability to impose a culture that people don't want to adopt. Democracy, human rights are a part of a culture, and you cannot impose it. I mean, look at the brilliant success of the American attempt to bring democracy to Iraq. or to bring women's rights to Afghanistan. You must be absolutely stupid to believe that it's even a possibility. The inevitability of the failure in Iraq and in Afghanistan was obvious from day one. You can't do it. Now, here is an interesting paradox. Today in the Middle East, Arab governments are much more responsible and moderate than their public opinion. In Jordan, you have a reasonable royal family, the Hashemite family, and you have a barbaric public opinion made primarily of Palestinians and members of the Muslim Brotherhood. People before the Arab Spring, the very name Arab Spring is ridiculous because the assumption was that what is wrong in the Arab world are the regimes, and if the people will take over the regimes, will topple the corrupt and radical and dictatorial regimes, and the people will select their own regimes, then things will be dramatically better and will be closer to democracy. Look at what happened in Egypt. They had free elections, and they elected the worst possible thing that Arabs can have, namely the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the number one reason that Arabs have not been able, most Arabs have not been able, to deal with the challenges of the 20th century, forget the 21st century, the 20th century, and that the Arab world is a failure, a total failure. In the United Arab Emirates, where you have a tremendous success in terms of a willingness of a regime to educate their young and their more sophisticated elites to tolerance, you have a tremendous success, not on the basis of asking the people what they want, but starting by having a leadership that knows where it wants to go in terms of joining the 21st century, meeting the challenges of the 21st century. And remember, also in Europe, we didn't start enlightenment with democracy. We started it with people who wanted to go in the right direction, educated their people in this direction, and democracy came later when the people were used to it. But look at what happened again in the Arab world during the so-called Arab Spring. Dictatorships were replaced by something even worse than these dictatorships. I mean, Mubarak was replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood, and it took a military coup in order to bring back to Cairo a more responsible government of Sisi. We've had a deranged dictator like Gaddafi, and killing him in Libya did not bring up from the Libyan society the democratic and enlightened elements. It brought a situation even worse than Gaddafi. It brought the civil war in Syria. So the idea that you can bring democracy to the Middle East is not only ridiculous, but is a total failure without one exception. There isn't one exception in the Arab world of 22 countries of one country that is even democratizing, let alone reached democracy. So again, if you want to be a shallow journalist, you can advocate it. If you want to be a prime minister in Canada or in Australia or in Britain or in France and give people illusions about what can happen in the Middle East and use terminologies that some journalists like very much, fine. The only point is the impact on the Middle East is usually negative, not only not positive, but even negative.
Following what you're saying, what do you have to say about the Islamic Republic of Iran that they're trying to topple that regime? Is that bad news, or should we not try to do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Like Germany in the 1930s and 40s, in Iran, you have a very capable and impressive people with a barbaric leadership. If you get rid of this leadership, of these barbarians, who, by the way, openly confess to being barbarians, by the fact that their message is focused on death to Israel and death to the United States. If you remove these barbarians, the Iranian people will become a very important and positive part of the Middle East. At the moment, Iran is trying to hegemonize the Middle East and then not only destroy this region with its barbaric objectives, but take then the oil and the other resources of this region in order to disrupt things far beyond the Middle East. So bringing down this regime is extremely important. Now, can you take one particular military action and it will bring down the regime? No. But can you and should you weaken this regime as much as possible, economically and in any other way, and sometimes use military means in order to prevent them from having nuclear immunity? Should you do it? Yes. Is it a sufficient condition? No. Is it a necessary condition? Yes, because if they have the nuclear immunity, if we are as stupid with Iran as we were with North Korea, then this regime will have immunity. If they can live with something, then it's a bad deal because they can accept it. Bringing down this regime should be the objective, even if it takes 20 years more. Bringing down the regime in the Soviet Union was tremendously important. It did not make Russia into a democracy, but it reduced the threat of the Soviet Union in a very, very dramatic way, and countries became independent and people were no longer dominated by the Soviet Union. So we don't know of one particular move that brings down the regime, but certainly whatever weakens this regime is absolutely necessary not only for the Middle East, it's far more than the Middle East. North Korea threatens much more than Japan, and Iran is 10 times more dangerous than North Korea because North Korea essentially wants to survive. Iran wants to spread, is spreading, was very successful until 2.5 years ago by establishing the ring of fire in the Middle East of other radicals. So again, whatever is bad for the Iranian regime is good for the Middle East and for anybody else in the world that doesn't want barbarians to dominate our future.
Now, we've heard of, tens of thousands of citizens in Iran that were slaughtered by the regime, but we don't see much protest in the West like they protested Israel in the war. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, there is a very strong element of anti-Semitism for thousands of years that has only grown recently because alongside the radical right becoming anti-Semitic, also the radical left became anti-Semitic, and the radical left had a major impact on moderate liberals, and anti-Semitism is now very prevalent also among liberals, and particularly in universities, in academic circles, among journalists, and in other elites in the West. This became the kind of rebellion of dumb young people in the West to show that they hate America, so they also hate Israel and they hate Jews. So this is something that is far beyond a political issue. I mean, take the New York Times. I mean, this is not exactly the kind of anti-Semites that we've seen in the past, but when the New York Times, like the BBC and CNN and what have you, the majority of media, when the focus is Jews kill children, this is basically the story that the New York Times, even before the war, tells everybody. I mean, look at their headlines and what they did with their front page in a few years ago in other clashes in Gaza. Jews kill children. This is the message. And it fits very well with the old blood libel. Now, here is the interesting thing. Anti-Semitism was very often not the initial motivation. But once they became anti-Israeli and anti the Jewish state, the Jewish collective, then they almost automatically and sometimes inadvertently used the arsenal of anti-Semitism in order to attack Israel, like this idea of Jews kill children. And it became very, very prevalent in the West, and today primarily among left-leaning governments. And therefore, you have this very negative attitude in labor governments, much more than in central right governments. I mean, look at Europe. The French are always on the wrong side. The Irish, the Scandinavian, not Scandinavian, I'm sorry, the Norwegian, the Spanish are very radical, anti-Israeli. And you will see that the more they lean to the left, the more anti-Semitic they are. So I don't expect anything else to be even close to the magnitude of hatred towards Jews. We spoke before about the United Nations. What is the number one issue the United Nations is dealing with? It is hatred of Israel and Jews. Okay? This is what the UN is about. This is what they do more than anything else, condemning Israel more than anybody in the rest of the world put together. And this is today the bon ton in many places. So I don't expect either this or what is happening in Sudan, what is happening in other parts of the world where you have barbarism and so on. The attention is anything that you can blame on the Jews. It's a given. You learn to live with it.
Now, you have people like Tucker Carlson and journalists that have become very anti-Israel in the past couple years that throughout their careers were not like that. Do you think it's just hatred of Jews, or are there other motives?
Look, it works. You see, being anti-Jewish works because there is a constituency that will support it, primarily on the left and center left, but certainly in the deep right and to some extent on the center right. And some people realize that they have a clientele, okay? It works for them, so they'll use it. You see, for me, as a Zionist, in the sense that a person that believes not only that, of course, Israel has, that the Jewish people has the right to self-determination and establishing a Jewish state and so on, this is for me self-evident, but living in Israel and being so strong that even when you're hated, you say, well, it's a problem. I'd rather be liked than hated. But even when I'm hated, I am strong enough to deal with it. My conclusion of this unbelievable outburst of anti-Semitism that we've seen in recent years is my choice of living in a place where Jews can defend themselves, where they don't depend on being liked by others, and they are strong enough to defend themselves even when they're not liked. This, for me, is a very important conclusion. And by the way, I'm saying very sadly, as a Jew, that I think Jewish life in Europe is over, and Jewish life in America, where I expected it to be over in 2 generations, it will be over in 1 generation. It's on the way out. It's on the way out because if you are in a position of a Jew who cannot defend themselves, Jews can be liked when they're victims. Strong Jews is something that people have a problem accepting. And I think the motivation for the hatred of Israel is that we are at the same time a democratic open society that insists on defending itself. What happened with the progressives was they decided that since it's a good idea for us, liberals, to fight barbarians with one hand tied behind our back because we don't want to stoop down to the level of the barbarians we are fighting, why not tie both our hands behind our back, be totally defenseless, and then we can blame ourselves for everything. And this whole approach is rejected by Israel. This whole, not only rejected by Israel, but successfully rejected by Israel. In other words, Jews who defend themselves and don't feel guilty about it and are successful in defending themselves and not feeling guilty about it are a threat of those who believe that there is something wrong with white people and they are responsible for everything that went wrong, and people of color or whatever you call yourself in the last fashion, they are the people who are victims and we owe them something and we have to compensate for something and we must feel guilty. Israelis don't. They say, we have a state. It's not perfect. It's only better than others. We will defend ourselves. And if you don't like it, you can go fly a kite. So this is something that people find unacceptable. And very often, after they adopt a very negative attitude towards us, they reach out for the arsenal of anti-Semitism that is already prepared for this kind of allegation that used to be focused on the individual Jew and now is focused on the collective Jew.
Now, you've said that Israel's mistake before October 7th was being reactive. Do you think that Israel now is committed to preemptive action against emerging threats?
I hope so. I hope we will not make the same mistake we've made for 100 years of learning our lesson and then forgetting it. We learned it in 21 and forgot it in 29. We learned it in 29 and we forgot it in 36, 39. We learned it in 36, 39 and forgot it in 1947. Latest, we've learned it in the Second Intifada with the barbarism of the Palestinians. By the way, not just in the Gaza Strip, the barbarism of the Palestinian people throughout, who condoned the war of terrorism that they called the Second Intifada, murdering every Jew. And until today, every school in the West Bank is called after somebody who killed Jews. And the more Jews you kill, the more you get paid and the more you're being revered by your own society. And we learned an important lesson in the Second Intifada 25 years ago, and then we forgot it. And I hope that the last lesson we will not forget so soon, but definitely Israel is not waiting for the barbarians to be prepared for war, but will attack them when they prepare for war. And we've had a ceasefire in Lebanon for more than a year, and since then we are killing their terrorists at the rate of one a day, more than 400 in the last year. And every time we find a factory that produces missiles or a terrorist that is planning actions against Israel, we kill them. And that's the only way you can deal with it. Now, if Lebanon one day will be a sovereign state where the Lebanese government can rein in the terrorists and we will not get terrorism from the Lebanese border, then you don't need preemptive action anymore because you have a government that prevents it. We have a government in Jordan that prevents the Jordanian population that is largely Palestinian and supportive of terrorism, but the Jordanian sovereign government prevents these terrorists from killing Jews, and therefore we don't have to take preventive actions against Jordan, and we can have good relations with Jordan. The Egyptians are doing it. They will not allow terrorists from their territory to attack Israel. So we don't have to take preventive action against Egypt. But when it comes to Lebanon, when it comes to the West Bank, when it comes to the Gaza Strip, when it comes to Iran, to the Houthis, where the barbarians are not only encouraging, but financing and arming the terrorists and preparing the groundwork for them to attack Israel, Israel must take preventive action. And I hope we will not unlearn this lesson too soon.
What about Turkey? Do you think that Turkey could be a threat to Israel?
Turkey is an enemy. Erdogan is a repulsive anti-Semitic barbarian, and we find him as an enemy on practically all fronts. In the Eastern Mediterranean, Libya and Turkey are trying to claim all the Eastern Mediterranean as Turkish economic waters at the expense of Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt. In Syria, Turkey is trying to establish a state that will be armed by Turkey, threatening Israel from the north. In Gaza, they are the greatest supporters with Qatar of the Hamas. Even when it comes to Somalia, even when it comes to other parts, including, for instance, inside Israel, they support Muslim Brothers, they support in Jerusalem people who are trying to stir up problems on Temple Mount. Turkey is an enemy. The problem is that Turkey is a member of NATO, and unfortunately, Trump likes Erdogan. So on the one hand, the good news is we're not going to have a war with Turkey. The bad news is that wherever Turkey can do something against Israel, the Turks are doing it. And we must consider Turkey as an enemy on all fronts, except in the military confrontation sense of the term.
Seems that Trump is also friends with Qatar.
First of all, prostitutes Western societies by bribing practically everybody, particularly the academia, and they're trying to encourage everybody in public opinion to undermine, and they're financing it, they're paying for it, to be anti-Israeli. They have the Al Jazeera network, which is basically the linchpin of every radical in the region, because they're glorifying the barbarians and barbarism of all kinds. And Qatar is a different kind of enemy. And again, this is not a question of a military confrontation, but we need politically to realize that whatever the Qataris do is negative, and whatever is good for Qatar is bad for Israel.
Do you think that Israel's strike on Qatar woke them up in some way?
No, I think that it demonstrated how far Israel is willing to go. The question if it was a mistake or not, I think is still open. The jury is still out. On the one hand, it's an element of deterrence. On the other hand, it worried countries that I didn't want to worry about Israel going too far. But the animosity of Qatar is not a product of this particular attack. And again, we didn't attack Qatar. We attacked Hamas leadership in Qatar. And I think we should kill Hamas people wherever they are. In certain countries, we have to be more careful.
Now, you've argued that listening to Europe would be suicide. Do you think that Europe is morally confused, or they're just strategically not serious?
You can't take them seriously. I mean, look at the last move of France and Britain, okay? And in the extended sense, you can also look at Canada and Australia as being European. You simply can't take them seriously. Look, if God forbid we would have listened to Europe, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons, Assad would have had nuclear weapons. So this is about the past. I think about Europe, with the exception of Germany, with this particular party in power, with the CDU in power. We should listen very carefully to what the Europeans say, or let me say, listen very politely to what the Europeans say, and then ignore them. Okay? Europe gives us a problem, but not a dilemma. It's a problem because they can hurt us, and they do. And it's not a dilemma because listening to them is not an option. An Israeli prime minister who would listen to Europe will not be supported by Israelis. Okay? Because the Europeans have a la-la land perception of the world. Their impact on world politics is negligible because they're not willing to be serious about it, okay? And again, if it were only Ireland and Norway, okay, but it's Britain and France, okay? So you simply can't take them seriously, again, with the exception of Germany, and even that may change. To some extent, also the exception of Italy, okay? But again, it really depends. Let me put it this way. You cannot disengage the refugee issue, that is by far the most important issue of the 21st century, from the attitude towards Israel. I don't think that it's an accident that in Britain, the far left with Corbyn is anti-Semitic, terroristically inclined, and then you have an unfriendly government in the Labour, a friendly government in the Conservative Party, and a more friendly option with Nigel Farage, okay? So I don't think that it's an accident that in Italy, the left is ragingly anti-Israeli, particularly the labor unions, and the center-right parties are more favorable to Israel. Not very favorable, but more favorable. I don't think that it's an accident that Sweden turned from being very anti-Israel when it was left to being more in the center of the stage today. And the more Europe is willing to deal with what this uncontrolled, irresponsible, massive immigration did to Europe, the more it is willing to be responsible, because the supreme irresponsibility is not to recognize the danger of this caliber of immigration from these sources to Western civilization. Okay? And I hope that the relatively positive change that we've seen in Europe after the war in Ukraine and after the realization of how dangerous this immigration is, I hope that this will continue to impact the continent to the point where the Europeans are willing to behave responsibly, first of all, in their own house, and then also internationally.
What about the United States? If the United States can go from backing Israel strongly to pressuring it within one single election cycle, do you think that America is still a reliable ally, or is it a risk?
First of all, it's the only ally. Second, since the establishment of the State of Israel, even when we had unfriendly presidents like Eisenhower in the first term and Jimmy Carter and Obama, and to a much lesser extent, Biden, the relations between Israel and the United States constantly improved, because whereas sympathy to Israel declined, respect to the power of Israel increased. So I'm not saying we have an equal partnership. Of course, it is not symmetric. We depend on the United States immeasurably more than the Americans need us. But it's not a one-sided story anymore. And a very strong Israel, let me put it this way. You can't leave the Middle East, because if you leave the Middle East, the Middle East will come to visit you. Because everything negative that emanates from this region comes to visit you in the civilized centers of the world. So if the United States doesn't want massively to have its boots on the ground for a long time, they need a strong Israel. So an investment in a strong Israel makes sense. Now, do the Americans always do what makes sense? No. By the way, do the Israelis always do what makes sense? No, we didn't make sense before October 7th, okay? But finally, in the final analysis, when Israel and the United States have the same enemies, the radicals in the Middle East are always the enemies of Israel and the enemies of the United States. You know, a senator asked me a few years ago, how long will the special relationship between Israel and the United States last? And I said, as long as they're burning American and Israeli flags together, we're in business. And by the way, they're not doing it only in Iran, they're also doing it in Colombia, okay? The same people who hate Israel in Colombia hate America in Colombia or in Harvard or wherever you have it. So this is the kind, and it's not just a Trump America, any America, okay? Any America that provides the world with freedom. We are threatened by China. What is threatened is human freedom. And America isn't perfect, and certainly Israel isn't perfect. But for Israel, a strong America is necessary if we want to live in a free world. And for the United States, Israel is very helpful if it wants to promote its position in the world. Imagine the United States had not one Israel, but three. One Israel next to North Korea, and one Israel next to Venezuela or Nicaragua. Don't you think it would be easier for the United States when people who don't wait to defend themselves when they must, and don't ask themselves, will we look good when we defend ourselves? Don't you think it would have changed dramatically the situation in North Korea and in parts of Central America? Do you think North Korea would become nuclear if next to North Korea there were an Israel? I don't think so, okay? Because remember what happened to Iraq and to Syria, okay? And what is happening now with Iran. Not with Israel alone, but I'm delighted to say the United States and Israel together. So will we always be lovable? No. Do I want to be lovable? Not really. Do I have, like many Jews in America, their ultimate desire is to be loved by the New York Times. Can I live without being loved by the New York Times? Yes. Okay? It would be nice to be loved, but it's not critical. You know, my grandmother, and I keep mentioning her, used to say that it's better to be young, rich, and healthy than old, sick, and poor. So, would I have wanted, in addition to being strong, also to be loved? Yes, it would have helped. But is it critical? No. Can you live being not loved? We have thousands of years of experience, more than anybody else. Do I want to use this experience? No. Do I have to? Yes. Can I live with it? Yes. Do I feel guilty? Not at all. So I had a Jewish mother and I don't feel guilty. I know that this is a strange combination.
Now, we know that there are Arab governments that quietly benefit from a strong Israel. Why is it that they cannot openly stand with Israel?
Because Egypt and Saudi Arabia cannot be more pro-Israel than Britain and France and Canada and Australia, and the Biden administration, and Obama, okay? And the UN, and Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International, and CNN, and BBC. Arab public opinion is very radical. To be responsible, Arab governments need to cater to Arab public opinion. When they do the right thing, they must say the wrong thing. When they don't do the wrong thing, they must at least say the wrong thing. So they do.
What are your thoughts on Israel and India's relations, alliance, and where do you see that?
First of all, I think for Israel, there are four countries that are important: the United States, Germany, Japan, and India. Okay? I think our opportunities today are with India and Japan. With the United States and Germany, we are in very close relations. I just returned from Tokyo. There is a different government in Tokyo, and I spoke to the top people in Tokyo, and I'm very, very, very encouraged. And I think that India is tremendously important for Israel. And I think that today, Modi is the only outstanding leader in any democracy. Is it the kind of democracy that I would like to have in Israel? No, the circumstances in India are very, very different, and I'm very, very impressed by what the Indians managed to do. But this guy is determined. This guy understands the crucial role of India in the world and the crucial role of good Indian-American relations in this world. And I'm delighted that he also recognizes the importance of relations with Israel. You see, it's very easy for a country with 7 million Jews to recognize the fact that 1.4 billion people are important. It's not so easy to recognize this in the other direction, and I'm delighted he does. And every time I go to New Delhi and I speak to people in India, I'm again encouraged and impressed by India. And again, I think if you look at the broader picture, if you want to deal with China, it is very important that the United States, India, and Japan work together. One day, when you have a responsible government in Australia, they can join. It can be the Quad. At the moment, these guys don't know what they're doing, okay? They're like the Canadians, okay? They don't know what they're doing. But an American-Indian relationship is tremendously important for the world, and an Israeli-Indian relationship is extremely important for India. India is for me important also because when I hear this inferior argument that Arabs cannot make any progress because of the impact of colonialism on the Arab world, and I say to myself, the Arabs only had colonialism light for 30 years. Look at what India did in spite of foreign domination in India, okay? And you see the enormous progress with the unbelievable difficulties. I mean, having a democracy in a country that still has the culture of castes in it is unbelievably difficult. And I have enormous respect for people who overcome these issues, and the Arabs whining about the impact of colonialism should learn from what people who suffered 100 times more than they did are now succeeding 100 times more than they did. Now, again, when I have this very impressive success in the UAE, I can prove that Arabs can do it, okay? So people who understand what needs to be done and are determined to do what needs to be done can do it, and whining is not the only strategy you can adopt.
You describe yourself as a smart optimist. Things will get worse, but Israel will get stronger faster. So, in closing, what do you think that looks like in the next 5 to 10 years in Israel?
First of all, we've already proven it. Things did get worse in recent decades because radicals became stronger primarily because of technology. They can build in their kitchen their missiles, and they can fit parts from toys on their missiles to be accurate. And democracies became weaker because the ultimate enemy of Western civilization, namely the progressives, had an impact on the liberals in the ways that weakened the liberals against the barbarians. So things did get worse, but Israel became stronger faster than things got worse. I'm delighted that you already adopt I want copyright on this distinction between, a dumb optimist that says things will get better and a smart optimist that says things will get worse, but I'll get strong faster than things get worse. So here we have the proof. Israel got stronger faster than things got worse, and therefore Israel is today dramatically stronger in the Middle East than it was 3 years ago. I don't see any reason that this will stop. And by the way, for those people who hope that internal difficulties inside Israel will weaken Israel, let me call their attention to the fact that without an effective government, the Israeli society showed resilience on a level that you could never imagine. Okay? I think it overshadows the Blitz in the Second World War. We had a 2.5-year war on 7 fronts with 35,000 missiles on a very small country, and the Israeli shekel is too strong, okay? The dollar is too weak, okay? And the Israelis are recuperating. People misunderstand the Israeli society. They misread the unpleasantness of Israelis. We are an unpleasant society, and only people like me who enjoy living in an unpleasant society know how much fun it is, okay, when you constantly disagree about practically everything. But the core is so strong, the resilience is so enormous that even their hopes that we will be destroyed by demonstrations of people who have good slogans, I don't think that that's the issue. So you can completely disagree with the government and completely disagree at the same time with the people who demonstrate against it. And this is the majority of the Israeli population. Unlike the United States, we have a torn apart political system that is totally dysfunctioning, but not a torn apart society. The Israeli society is functioning. The Israeli army, that is a people's army, could not function if we were a torn apart society. Shout at each other and dislike each other and say terrible things about each other, but we are a very strong and resilient society. So add to it the military strength, the economic robust nature of Israel, the technological innovation, the scientific advancement. Israel is very well fitted to the 21st century. We have a great future here. And one last comment. If we get rid of this regime, our best friends will be the Iranians. I see Iran as Israel. Iran without this barbaric regime and Israel as the two most important successes. I'll be delighted if what we see in the UAE will be broadened in the Arab world. I would like to see it very much in other parts in the Middle East, but you can have a more prosperous Middle East, a less unstable Middle East, thanks to a very large extent to a strong Israel.
Professor Schueftan, I want to thank you for your time and for this fascinating conversation. And speak again soon. If you want to leave us with a final message, anything that we didn't mention, the floor is yours.
There's a joke, and I've used it again and again, but it never gets old. The Almighty is sick and tired with the human race and decides to eliminate it. And he decides to do it with a flood. But no Noah, no ark, no olive branch, just a flood. And he calls the leaders of the three monotheistic relations and tells them, tell your people in 2 weeks it's over. So the Christian guy comes to his people and he said, we sinned, we did bad things. Let's for 2 weeks do good deeds and pray. Maybe the Lord will reconsider. The Muslim says, oh, it's not us, it's occupation, it's colonialism. We are not responsible for anything. They did it to us. And the Jew comes to his community and he says, guys, we have 2 weeks to learn how to live underwater. I think this is what Israel is about.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. And I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
Thank you.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.